All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. Today's episode is going to be a hopefully relatively short discussion of fitness nutrition stuff that we are going to, you know, full disclosure, we're going to have this in our back pocket to upload when we don't have time to record to upload on our normal schedule.
Yeah, so that's why I was switching out books from our last one. And if we're wearing the same clothes and everything, that's
That's why.
but the topic should be relatively timeless, although it's an ever evolving industry. But within the next year or so, these things should still apply. So if something comes out between now and then, we'll try to remember what we said, so we don't post it up and with improper information. But as of the time we're recording this, this is the best information we have. Uh, and this one will be fitness and nutrition oriented, like Keith said, because we could riff on that anytime. Did you have any topics you wanted to go into, or I've got a couple things.
The only thing on my mind right now, because it bugs me every time I fricking go to the box gym, public gym I go to when I need that instead of what I've got in my garage. Um, and because as an example for what we just recorded, I use my warm-up routine as an analogy for something. Walking on the treadmill for 5 minutes is not a warm-up. And unless your workout is to jog, then yeah. And that's the illustration I use
I mean, is
when
it a
I
brisk walk or is it like just a leisurely walk?
eat. My problem is it's either is a problem for what I generally see people doing afterwards, which is a, kind of to some degree or another standard weightlifting routine.
Because walking can be a warm up. I mean, get that heart rate up enough, get your
Hmm.
body temperature raised, a light sweat going. But if you go straight from walking to, 5 rep max squats, you're
Yeah.
not going to be ready.
Or
So
well,
there needs to be something in between that.
e-
But
exactly. Well, my problem is, okay, so what did that walk on the treadmill do to get your scap moving and warm up your muscles to then go drop down on the bench and do some bench presses? So
a little bit of warm up, systemic blood flow.
yeah,
So there is that.
it's not worthless because especially if like you've been sitting for a while or if it's a cold day, you literally, I mean, it's in the name, warm up. You want to warm your muscles up. You want to get your blood flowing. You want to raise your body temperature, get a light sweat going, right? But I use this as an example because when I first learned from you how to what a dynamic warm up was and then how to do it, it's kind of odd. And I assumed that as, you know, some kind of more complicated elements of fitness started to spread via social media, that this wouldn't be so odd anymore, but it still is. People look at me funny when I try and teach them how to do a dynamic warm up. And so the illustration I often use is walking is okay, well that's actually a good warm up if your program for today is to go for a run. So the best warm up for when I could run or wanted to start off walking, brisk walk, light jog, faster jog, whatever your pace is going to be for your time or distance, right? There's a progression there, and you are focusing on the systems that you're going to be using. So if you're going to be lifting weights, then you need to get the joints moving and the muscles working that you're going to focus on.
Well, there's a lot of variables that go into this, but there's a time element. Like say I'm trying to squeeze in somebody. The
Yeah.
most important part of the warm up is the warm up. So I'll toss them on the rower for like 3 to 5 minutes. And then like say bench press is first. I can toss them on a bench, but we're not starting, we're starting with the bar.
Hmm.
and then we're going up from there. So you can go through that motion with 45 pounds, then 95 pounds, then 135, and ultimately they end up at 315 or whatever it is. So yes, you get the warm up, and then for the range of motion, you just start super, super light. You can do that, but obviously it's optimal to do a full dynamic warm up in that in the process. But remember, also warming up is dependent on your fitness level. Your
Yes.
gym bros that don't do any cardio, walking might be a great warm up for them because they're working hard to do that. I mean, it sounds like a joke, but I'm being serious.
Yes.
If you're very cardiovascularly unfit, like your guys that don't train legs and sit on the bench press every day, walking like that probably has their heart rate in zone two, which means they're getting a sweat on, their blood is pumping, their body is warmed up. And again, depending on how low they start, they can
Yes.
ramp up to that. So
Right.
there's a little bit of both of those, but obviously, optimally, you want to go through the full dynamic warm up,
But
including an activation like
yes,
push ups before you bench press or
that's the word I needed to use that I in my ranting I hadn't used yet is activation. Is you do not just jump straight to your working weight. That's a good way to hurt yourself.
yeah, definitely a good way to hurt yourself.
Yeah.
Uh,
So if you're when I do my evaluation, part of that is I teach a dynamic warm up, and I tell people, okay, this is probably more than you're going to need, but I want to show you all these movements. One, so that we get something done today, and two, so that you have these things in your repertoire. And depending on your fitness level and what you're doing, you probably won't need to do everything I'm about to show you, right? So to your example about, all right, you're in a hurry, so 3 to 5 minutes of something to get the blood pumping, and now let's drop on the bench because it's vertical push day, and we'll start with the bar and we'll start escalating. So that's a lot easier to do if you're depending on your program. So like uh if I'm supersetting bench and row, it's going to be different than if I'm just doing a back day. So if I'm in a hurry, one of my things is I frequently like do push pull leg splits. So if I'm kind of in a hurry, I'll just jump right onto the cable row and I'll really light do some rows, and then I'll do some fly stretches.
mm-hmm.
Just grab 10, 15 pound dumbbells, let them drop down like I'm doing a fly, and just hold it there to stretch out the pecs, to stretch out the antagonist, which is going to be fighting against that movement if it's really tight. And then I'll do some thoracic flexion and extension and some rotations and things to get that back moving, and I'll escalate. So I'm activating those muscles I'm going to be using, and I'm acclimating the muscle group that I'm using to what I'm going to do that day. But the point is, one, you need a freaking warm up, and two, your warm up needs to warm up the things you're going to use.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, you don't have to go through it all. Just what's important for the day. So, example would be yesterday's workout. I did a really hard workout yesterday because I was feeling froggy, and it's transition week, so I can kind of do whatever I want as long as I
Mm-hmm.
don't loan my spine too heavy. It'd be the similar to a deload week a power lifter would do, except we do conditioning during our transition weeks. So we unload the spine, but we're still doing hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And I just decided to pull one out of my old airstrike operations training program and do the special forces workout. But I didn't have a lot of time, so I did a 10-minute row. And then because the first part is real upper body intensive, I did 3 sets of push-ups, no monies, and T-spine stretch, and and then went into the workout. So yeah, I did the general warm up, but again, your modality for warming up too. Walking is different than rowing for 5 or 10 minutes because rowing, I'm actually doing the pull and the total body motion to go along with it. Doing a stepper is different than walking. Jogging is different than than the stepper. Jumping rope, you get some shoulder activation, some wrist activation while your legs are doing most of the work. So you can change the modality of your warm up depending on what you're doing. But yeah, you can do a short warm up. Just take into account what you're going to be doing. Now, that being said, most of your gym bros that bench, yeah, they can bench a lot relative to a normal person, but I guarantee you they're nowhere near their genetic max just because of the stupid way they're doing it. So there's
Mhm.
also that to go into it.
Well, that's my old man rant done. What you had specific stuff you wanted to get into though?
Well, I think the topics of today are going to focus around something we've been kind of talking about a little bit at a time is protein consumption
Hmm.
and also time restricted feeding, which people interplay that with intermittent fasting, and there's a lot of overlap to it. But we'll stick with the term time restricted feeding because it would be more accurate for what we're
Right.
talking about.
Meaning, don't feed your mogwai after midnight, or it
Well,
turns into a gremlin.
yeah, even still, your 16/8 splits and things like that are still time restricted feeding because you feed within a restricted period of time. Uh, Whereas a fast is more of a general term. I could go on a
Hmm.
5-day fast and that's not time restricted feeding. But if
Right.
I have a scheduled, I can eat between noon and 8 this day every day, then that's time restricted feeding. Where there's a fast in between those eating times, time restricted feeding is the more because you're restricting how the period of the day you can actually have food. Uh, well, I came across something. I'm reading an excellent book. I don't have the cover on it because I take them off while I'm reading it, but it's called The Comfort Crisis
Hmm.
uh, from Michael Easter. And he basically goes through a kind of, it's really well written. He's going on a hunting trip in Alaska where you basically get dropped out in the middle of nowhere and you're left on
Wow.
your own.
That
Uh,
sounds awesome.
but he's in the prep process for this whole thing and actually even goes into the motivation for making it happen. He goes through all of the things in our lives that we that we're actually becoming less healthy because of our need for it's the comfort creep that comes along with Western society and how we live our
Hmm.
lives. Well, when part of it is on diet, nutrition, and feeding and hunger and things like that. Well, and I came across a name uh, that we have talked about before and something completely unrelated. Dr. David Sabatini. Remember him?
Remind me which one he is. The name is familiar,
The
but
guy who was on the verge of curing cancer and he got Me Too'd.
oh man, yes, yeah, you brought up a couple articles on him, and that was yikes.
Well, it's kind of a little bit of serendipity because I've been studying with the protein stuff, which is why I kind of combined them today. The mTOR pathway activation, and for some reason my brain didn't put together that that's what
Mm.
Sabatini was working on until I read this book where he put the two together. Uh, but So what he was working on was he discovered the mTOR pathway, little m, big TOR, and it's a pathway of hormone signaling in the body that what he figured out, and I'm going to try to put this in like the most poor man terms I can, is it's kind of like it tells your body where to distribute. It's twofold. What I was looking into with the protein is it kind of signals your body to distribute your protein to certain places. So
Mm.
if you have protein, your body automatically will prioritize that for your vital organs, your heart, lungs, intestinal tract, all of these parts, your replacement of all the smooth muscle in your veins and arteries. That's going to be the priority because that keeps you alive, and then go to skeletal muscle. Whereas there are things in our diet, which we're going to into in a little bit after we go through Mr. Sabatini here, uh, that you can actually stimulate mTOR to prioritize skeletal muscle. So that's a big deal if you're trying to exercise to get lean and fit and
Mhm.
and put it basically pack on muscle mass to stave off adult age onset sarcopenia, which is why we slowly die realistically, because eventually we erode, and
A-
part of that is our muscle mass, which is
As
the reserve for protein for our body when we need it.
partially an aside, partially a reinforcement of what you're saying is the reverse happens as well. So if you've ever been overweight, I should find my wedding pictures of chubby Sam. And
Yes,
if
and
you've
send them to me. I need before pictures.
uh, if you've ever been overweight and been working on losing weight, it's really frustrating and annoying when people say they can see it in your face, because obviously that's not what you want. What you want is to be able to take your shirt off. But that's how the body works. Is this is not a primary fat storage area. So your body's going to take it away. That thing you want to go away, the midsection, that's last,
Mm-hmm.
because that's your primary fat storage area, right? So it's going to start pulling from these tertiary and then secondary. And then once you've gotten that whittled down, then you start to get rid of that spare tire. It's, this is something we could rant about and do another whole episode on, is spot training. That's why spot training is not a thing, because your body is going to prioritize things based on survival.
Spot training can be a thing, but it might not be dramatic. But
That's
we'll
that's
go
why
into
it's
that
a
if we do the
whole
spot
episode
training.
of
Yeah.
its own. Yeah.
Okay, so this is where fitness goals kind of, again, there are no solutions, there's only trade-offs, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So someone like David Attia, Dr. Attia, he is really big on the health benefits of maximal strength and of building up muscle mass for old
Mm-hmm.
age, which is, yes, I agree. I 100% agree. So he kind of he goes back and forth with fasting protocols because, well, there's only so much protein you can utilize at any given time, which seems to be somewhere around 0.25 grams per pound. So for me, that would be like 50 grams per meal. 50 grams of protein per meal would be the top end I can use for recreating protein in the body, and the rest will be broken down into energy. And actually, I've got a little anecdote to go along with it because I've really, in this whole sober kick, I've upped my food intake because I've had free calories I can use. And with that, the protein went up, and I've been peeing 24/7, which is a result of the fact that my body's breaking down protein for energy, and there's a byproduct of urea. And your kidneys say, "Give me water because we need to get rid of this toxic thing."
Mm.
And because I'm going through gluconeogenesis and it's having this byproduct, my body has to get rid of it through my kidneys. So you pee a lot. So I either adjust my protein but I like meat. And so if I adjust my food up, then typically I end up with more protein. I just deal with peeing more. So, but that all aside, that's a testament to there is an upward amount of what your body's going to utilize at any given time. And because I guess some of my meals go over that, I'm ending up in the byproduct of what happens after that. So Datia he kind of pulls again away from the fasting sometimes because it gets in the way of maximizing your protein intake. Because if you're my size, you can take, right at about 200 pounds. Well, I'm actually 192 today. I've lost 10 pounds since the no drinking thing, by the way. So, yay, secondary effects. But 50 grams per meal, and you got to spread that out enough that your body's utilized most of the one before. Well, that makes fasting really hard because that's 4 meals to get your 200 grams of protein, your one per pound body weight, to maximize its usage in your body in timing and in amount. So you've got two things going
Yeah.
there. And so that makes fasting really hard if your focus is muscle mass. But now we go to the other side of mTOR. Now we're talking about longevity with something other than muscle mass. And I'm going to use Sabatini's words here straight from this book here, from the interview, is think of mTOR as a general contractor, signaling the body to demolish its old cells and replace them with newer, healthier ones. So here's another effect of this pathway. The body's oldest cells have all sorts of problems and are implicated in many of the diseases that end up killing us. So old cells in the body, inefficient cells in the body are cause a whole host of problems, inflammation and just inefficiencies within the body. Actively they actively damage the tissues in which they reside and can be directly linked to features such as natural aging. So now this signal, the mTOR pathway, senses whether your body is fed or not fed. Now, quoting from the book again, when you go without food, the contractor calls in all its workers. So that's why it's the general contractor. It's not the drywall guy. It's not the electrician. It's not the nervous system guy. It's not the cardiovascular guy. It's not the skin guy. It's the general contractor. So it goes, when you go without food, it calls in all the workers. It's the one way you can trigger a whole series of events that are rejuvenating and anti-aging. Your body is ruthlessly efficient and it culls the herd by consuming your oldest, weakest cells first. And then he also quotes from another researcher to say he calls this process taking out the trash. So this pathway that you can stimulate to create skeletal muscle, if you do it right, can also be stimulated to clear all the old crappy shit that's floating around in your body because of just the natural process of these cells aging. Benefits on two sides. One is less efficient for building muscle mass, but one is more efficient for setting you up for being healthier later. So how do we balance those two? Now, as a side note, because we talked about Sabatini before, why is Sabatini expendable to a Me Too movement when so many people get away with a lot of crap because they're useful in some way, shape, or form to society? Mm-hmm. Just from what I read, why was Sabatini expendable?
That's a good question.
Because no one makes money from teaching fasting. No pharmaceutical company in the world is going to make money when you could say you can lower your chance of having cancer by being hungry every once in a while. It's not a drug. He wasn't producing a drug for somebody.
There is not a supplement to sell there.
There's not a supplement or drug to sell there. So even though he was on the verge of, I wouldn't say curing cancer, but at the same time, with this knowledge we have at our fingertips, we could greatly reduce it.
Well, and it would certainly be a step in that direction.
It would definitely be a step in that direction.
Because other people would build off of his work, because that's how that works, is the work gets built off of work. So it stages, right? That's interesting. Bottom line it for those of us who don't understand witchcraft then is, so you mentioned, okay, well, how do you balance? So for the average person, then how do you go about achieving that balance? Because
let's start at the beginning of the day. Okay, say you decide to change your ways and have an eating protocol. Right? So we want the benefits of this fast, but we also want to maximize our protein intake. Right? So first of all, you might just have to come to the conclusion that you're not going to be able to just straight up bodybuild without chemical enhancement, which hopefully none of us are taking that kind of chemical enhancement. So you have to be okay with a little bit slower results.
Yeah, my balls are small enough as it is. All right.
Yeah. So the other part is you might have to be okay with, well, if you're like me, you like a diet high in protein, you're going to have to deal with peeing a little bit more often. Okay. That's a small price to pay for being healthy, right? So how do we maximize the skeletal muscle? Well, it might be timing. So when do I have excess protein? When do I taper off and things like that? So we go into crap. So we go back to our buddy that we've brought up before that wrote books in the 90s about how much protein we're going to be having. So I got curious and I decided to dig further into his work. So this is the stuff I've already brought up where we're looking at greater than
Mhm.
1.5 grams per kilogram per day, which is almost twice the RDA recommendation. Well, I went looking into his work and I came across stuff like this. Muscle protein synthesis is suboptimal following a typical carbohydrate rich breakfast. So you're coming out of your fast, whether that's
But
waking up in the
Sam,
morning.
breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and
Well,
cornflakes are a part of this complete breakfast.
it still could be, but at the
Mm.
same time, it needs to be different. It can't be cornflakes, which have about with if you use regular milk, has about 8 grams of protein in your
Mm.
bowl. Now I came across this guy. Look at the school he went to.
Uh-huh.
Oh my gosh, I know him. He's actually a really cool dude. But let me bring up his paper here. Kirk used to always, he was a grad student at UTMB when I was there, but he would always come into the lab and help us with everything we were doing because I guess he was bored and he's a nerd. So, but what they did here, and this is an excellent design, by the way, for what they're doing. Remember, I talked about how hard it is to do research in
Yeah.
nutrition and this is actually similar to the design I was going to use for my exercise study. But what they did is a double crossover. So what that means is they had the subjects come in and they were randomly put into group A or group B. And then they gave them, I think it was a 30-day, say here, they gave them a wash period. And then they
Uh,
had the same people come in, 30-day washout. Yeah. So a 7-day crossover with a 30-day washout. So
now
they did.
explain what that means.
So what they did is you come in, you're put in arm A or arm B of the study. The and the, because this is blood markers and actually absorption rates using the isotopes, and I'll explain that as we go through here. So you went into one side or the other. So you either had the low protein breakfast, the standard breakfast
Hmm.
for the US, or you had the high protein breakfast. And then they measured how quickly it was or how much of it was absorbed into the muscle, which they use these stable isotopes. Basically, they put a marker on the amino acids that you're eating, and then they take a muscle biopsy and measure how much you actually absorbed.
Which is important because if you're consuming calories that aren't being absorbed for use,
Mm-hmm.
that means they're being put into storage, i.e., fat.
Mm-hmm. And so then they give you 30 days to go about your daily life like you normally would have. And you come back in and you're put in the other group. So that's where the crossover comes out after a 30-day washout. So it makes sure nothing they did is affecting your body
Yeah.
by the time you
So,
come back in. And so the same person that had the high protein gets the low protein and they measure how
yeah,
much of it was
it
absorbed.
it's something we referenced when we were recording earlier that one of the difficulties in trying to figure things out with the human body is there are a zillion variables. There are variables we don't know exist yet because we're still learning how the this biological machine works. So you can't say, oh, well, it just so happened that that group just happened to have X, Y, and Z, biology, genetics, whatever. It's no. So yeah, good, very good methodology there.
Yeah. So what they found was in comparison with the regular carbohydrate rich American breakfast, the high protein, which they use 30 grams as high protein, and it might even be higher than that, promoted increased utilization of protein. So it wasn't just that there was more protein to use, so it went in there. It was a higher percentage of what they did eat
Mm,
that went in there, which is important because anybody could say, oh, well, more protein, obviously there's more something to be absorbed. But no, it actually had a greater relative impact as well. And so this is one study in the lead up to it all, but the main author or the author of the book I brought up is Donald Layman. This book here, he's got a series of basically 30 years of studying this to come up with that it's actually stimulation of that mTOR pathway that triggers your body to prioritize skeletal muscle at that moment, with that coming out of your fast and having a high protein meal to come out of it. So we actually get more absorption in that first meal than any other part of the day, is what he ultimately comes across. Now, he hasn't gone that far, but he thinks a bracketing effect might even be better. But even further research says at least that first meal kind of gets your body going for the rest of the things. So your highest protein meal should be the first meal if you're going to maximize intake into the skeletal muscle. So if you want to take on a fasting protocol, well, you want to fast long enough that you go into the pathways that take everything down, which seems to be around that 12, 14, 16 hour mark, depending on what you eat, but then come out of it with your high with a high protein meal to stimulate that same pathway to prioritize skeletal muscle. And then you work your way till the end of your fast, and then over the time you're sleeping, you're regenerating all the other things in your body. So a lot of work still to be done, but this is the kind of the path it's kind of leading down, and all things are kind of going in the same direction.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is that the cowboys of the Old West who had steak and eggs for breakfast were smarter than the FDA.
Well, in our last video that we're gonna that you brought up your warm up, it was the religious one. Look at all the things we kind of did naturally until
Yeah.
industry took over.
Uh-huh.
What was a standard breakfast before Kellogg? Eggs, bacon, toast, right? Two eggs, two standard pieces of bacon, some toast, and a glass of milk is 30 grams of protein, man. Two eggs is 14. Two slices of bacon is about another 15. So you're already almost at 30, and your glass of milk will put you over the top
Mm-hmm.
with some carbs to give you energy from the day from your toast. That was a standard breakfast, and we intuitively did that. Why are eggs considered breakfast food?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you go have eggs for dinner, and people are like, "Oh, you're having breakfast for dinner, aren't you?" Well, no, I'm having dinner, and I just happen to like eggs.
Yes, yes, I do.
And you're the one that wanted IHOP. Come on.
Well, that's food for thought. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah, I'm on a long fast right now. I ate at about 6:30 last night, and I'm not eating till about that same time tonight because I got to get fancied up for a banquet.
You know, speaking of kind of intuitive, even without all this data and studies that you're showing here, um, one of the things that I got from you that I use personally and to tell others is the way you used to phrase it is eat more protein than you think you need because the if you're working out properly, that protein will be put to use. And if it's more than you need, well, at least it keeps you from eating other crap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
because
and and
it's satiating.
and this is, kind of what you meant is that the way your body uses it is different than the way it uses the other two macros, carbs and fat.
Well,
And so,
even when it breaks it down for energy, it ultimately breaks off the amine group, which has the nitrogen and sulfur in it, and reforms it into a carbohydrate, into glycogen. Gluconeogenesis is the process in your liver, and it sends the waste products to your kidneys and then the rest to the rest of your body for energy. But the way they measured calories, so they say you pretty much everybody's heard the 4 calories per gram from
mhm.
carbohydrates, 4 calories per gram from protein, 9 for fats, and 7 for alcohol, right? Well, the way they did that is they actually, so calorie is actually a unit of heat. It's the amount of energy it takes to raise, and I'm going to try to get this at least mostly right. 1 centiliter of water, 1 degree Celsius at one something
It's a function of
at,
time there, right?
at sea level at what 1 degree latitude. Or there's a lot of things that go into it
Yeah,
that are
yeah.
outside factors. And so what they did was they basically used these things as fuels to heat them, like basically just burned wood underwater, but instead of wood, they had protein, they had carbohydrates, and kind of isolated. And yes, there's the exact same amount of energy in a carbohydrate in a protein as the carbohydrate, but there's a bunch of energy you need to use to turn it into a carbohydrate. So it would be like taking say a carbohydrate's a log, you throw it on the fire, you get so much heat, but you have a log inside of a plastic wrapping that's inside of, a zip tie, and you have to take all those other things off first and then throw the log in. Where you use energy to do all that other stuff to get the same amount of heat as the original log. So it's you don't get the net 4 calories per gram because
Yeah.
they did it in a laboratory environment to make the calculation. That's how many chemical bonds are broken versus what you can actually use in your body as chemical bonds. Uh, so you again, yeah, you get the energy from it eventually. So it doesn't hurt to eat too much protein to a certain extent. There is a too much, but it's more than most people can eat. Uh, but at the same time, you don't get the net amount. So you're full. You're not. You don't have as many calories available to your body, so you should actually still more easily be able to stay in a calorie deficit. Protein is good, people. Don't
Protein is
listen.
good, people.
Don't listen to Bill Gates.
You will eat the bugs and you will like it.
Well, bugs are probably a great source of protein. I'm not going to argue
Uh,
that fact. It's
well,
just not our preferred source.
I'm gonna go eat some pot roast because screw you and your bugs. All right.
Well,
Well,
I'm gonna get into. I've been learning fashion. I look good in that suit, and we're gonna go. I'm gonna be arm candy at her med school reunion, and I'm going to eat all the foods. I'm fasting not to fit in my suit. I'm fasting because it's going to be a night where I'm not even going to worry about tracking food. I am just going to eat all the goodiness. I can imagine a bunch of doctors would have the best stuff
you
there.
would hope
So
so. All right. Well, you have
unless
fun with
there's
that.
the bugs because they're woke doctors.
Oh no, she didn't graduate from Minnesota, did she?
All right. So we don't know when this will be up. Uh, when you see it, we didn't give you any actual advice. Please consult a doctor before you
Hmm.
do anything dramatic with your diet or exercise program. We do recommend exercise in general, but again, make sure you are healthy enough and you start at the proper pace. You're not either of our clients. You're not paying us. You did not sign a waiver, so we did not give you nothing we did was a prescription from us. Anything else?
No, we'll see y'all when we see y'all.